right, ladies and gentlemen, the fine staff at FCAT gave us the go sign, which means that this is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Sunderland Board of Selectmen. If we can call it to order at 7:05, not quite the 6:45 our internal clock registers. Tonight, we have no appointments, we have some minutes to review. There are a couple of Board of Selectmen's updates, and then there is a caucus that needs a signature. We have a DLTA, which is an assistance grant request in front of us, and then the unfortunate task of accepting the resignation. We also have to act on the recommendations of the highway superintendent for some snow and ice deficit spending. So if we could start tonight with our minutes of the January 21st, 2014. At one point, we were talking about the highway budget, and then the police budget, and then a couple of actions with an EMS update from our representative, Tom.
Motion.
So we have a motion on the minutes of January 21st. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's made and seconded for the minutes of January 21st. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. So next up, we have the Board of Selectmen's update. This past weekend was the Mass Municipal Association Conference in Boston. I think it's an important thing, has been attended by the board, representatives of the board for all the time. Certainly I've been serving and Tom's been serving. And it gives an opportunity for not just workshops presented and directed by the MMA, but also networking with other boards. Towns like Mount Washington, Irving, Waltham, we all.
That one across the river there.
That one over there,
one
Deerfield,
there. Yeah, there
exactly.
you go.
Hadley, it's not just the Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts we end up with, but Easton and those areas with very, very similar challenges, but also more importantly, oftentimes, some real opportunities. Although I wasn't able to attend, David and Tom were both there. Outside of the networking, some of the workshops can be very, very interesting. And so, did you guys have takeaways with respect to the MMA conference?
I have a cold. I brought that back with me.
Stare it over there.
But I have a lot of homework, a lot of fascinating. I had some great seminars. Met with some people from UMass, and
nice.
A lot of good, especially with regards to like technology and getting information out to people. And I thought it was even much better than last year even. And we had a lot of good conversations with fellow selectmen and everything.
Nice.
It was a very good conference.
Good. Tom, any takeaways from it?
Well, one of the seminars that I attended was concerning hoarding. And sometimes people have a misconception of what hoarding means and what hoarding is. And there's actually a big difference between hoarding and squalor.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And you have to differentiate between, is it hoarding, is it squalor, and or is it a combination? But identifying, it was interesting that when they talk about repeating, and it's not just going in and throwing everything in a dumpster and making that makes a problem go away. And it was a very interesting story that they told. Well, one of the stories was a woman that basically there was some hoarding, and one of the things in her apartment was a pile of cocktail napkins, and they were just going to pick them up and throw them out. And but the guy, and what we don't do in Franklin County, this area basically is every town is pretty much on their own through the Board of Health, typically through the Board of Health. But what this group does out near Boston is that they actually have a task force, and it includes 30 towns, cities and towns, and they basically try to find out why someone, typically there could be concerns with mental health and capacity also. But this one woman had all these cocktail napkins, a very high thing, and one of the people was just going to throw it away, and then the guy went through and started reading what was on the napkins, And I guess this woman had a propensity, or her family did have a propensity for Alzheimer's and dementia. And I don't know if that's true or false, if that, how it works, but she felt that because a lot of people in her house was going to have this, or had the disease, she was going to get it. So every time she went out, she noted who she went with, where she went, and what they talked about, so that if she ever did happen, she could go back and relive those memories,
Kinda
and
like
that she really had a life.
Cue card.
Diary
Right.
and cocktail napkins.
But they talked about the importance of finding out why something's happening and getting, most hoarders are males, most are over 50. Women have a greater success rate. If you have a problem with hoarding, they have a greater propensity to solve the problem and not repeat. So it was very interesting. And I actually have a FERCog meeting Thursday night this week, and one of the things I'm gonna talk at the FERCog is to talk and see if there's any thought about maybe getting a person or looking into establishing a program like that. One of the things, it was a simple thing they did, was on the ambulance calls, that's one of the check sheets on the ambulance calls, they have
Right.
at the bottom of the thing, and whoever goes in, the EMTs or paramedics, will go into a facility or home, and they judge the place, 1 through 10, as to if it's hoarding or not. And if it's a very high score, then the hospital social staff would step in.
Yeah.
So there's just things, or I think it's important for us to learn more about it, because, believe it or not, hoarding affects 5% of our population. So it's not an isolated thing.
Right.
So, so we talked about that. We also, I know there's a drive in town to look at a new playground.
Yep.
And there's grants out there that you can create green playgrounds and
Yep.
green structures and combined sewer overflow with using green versus, and they talked about one facility that out in Missouri, they had 6 counties, they increased the tax on whatever it was by 1 cent. And today they can control their combined sewer overflow. It was like 700 million gallons.
Wow.
They can control that, and now they have 1,500 miles of hiking trails in addition.
Huh.
So,
So a combination of erosion, capture, all those things
yeah, and
targeted
it's,
to wreck. That's interesting.
but, and again,
Huh.
sometimes we have plans, sometimes we don't communicate with, typically we don't communicate, but there may be grants out there that would
Yep.
help pay for green playgrounds.
Isn't that interesting, huh?
So it was pretty good. We also had an opportunity to listen to 5 gubernatorial candidates.
Yeah.
And it's, in my belief, is that it's unfortunate that the way the elections are done, we don't get a chance, or the average citizen doesn't get a chance to listen to these 5 people. These were on the Democratic side, but to listen to what they have to say. Because there's 2, Martha Coakley and Steve Grossman, that are pretty well-known. One's a present attorney general, the other one's a treasurer. But the other 3 are from very divergent backgrounds, and they have a very different way of looking at things. And it's just too bad we don't. It's usually captured in it's usually captured in the political process,
Right.
Democratic, meaning Democratic and or Republican caucuses that most people don't go to. It's a very small percentage.
Interesting.
So we got to listen to that, and we got to tear apart the governor's projected budget.
There's a lot of red there.
Well, what I did, I just took the numbers and compared what our FY 2014 cherry sheets with the governor's proposed numbers.
What would be what we refer to as House 1.
In the old days, we used to call
Used to
House
call it,
1.
Yep.
And it's very interesting, because the governor actually blew off addressing the MMA.
Nice.
We kind of knew why,
Right.
Yeah.
because he was not his budget did not go over very well. but for the town of Sunderland, just so people understand, and we did talk about this at the conference also, about budgets, and we do know, well, we know, that a budget is not just an expenditures, but you have to look at how you get money.
That's right.
But just so people in our town will understand, our residents understand, with what was presented in the governor's budget, and he said, staff said, it was that they're concentrating on education, and they made unprecedented increases in education. Well, the town of Sunderland right now, for Chapter 70, which is our basic money from the governor for the state for education, we are gonna go up a whopping $4,325. So what I'd like to do is send Marty Barrett a
Yeah.
little note and say, tell her that she can spend that $4,325 wherever she wants.
Right, exactly right.
We don't care.
The governor's passed it right through, we're gonna pass it right through.
Marty just take it. And that is being facetious. I hope everyone
understand.
understands out there, this is being facetious. But this is so the actual growth in Chapter 70 next year is for the town of Sunderland, is $4,325. And when you go down through everything, and this is just I marked up a lot of things, but I just did a basic, if you look up the total estimated receipts for FY 15 versus 14, basically the town of Sunderland goes up $101,212. Well, which doesn't sound bad until you realize how the state does things. $80,981 is school choice.
Right, right.
Okay?
Yeah, you can't net those numbers.
That's not a net number.
Yeah, we've learned in years past, you can't net those numbers. That's just choice in or out, mainly out usually.
Correct, and you can't. So bottom line, it's for local aid, Chapter 90, all of that, libraries, whatever, we're up about 20, in rough calculations, $20,231.
Right.
Now, and I just hope, we're getting close. One thing Scott said is about the opportunities of talking and networking with people. We did meet with the Speaker of the House.
Oh, nice.
He talked to us. He also mentioned in his talk that the House and Senate leadership were not very happy with the governor's budget. And I think he said that there's no way that what we saw in the governor's budget is what's gonna be the final budget to the cities and towns.
Well, that's good to
In
hear.
so many words, yes.
Well, he used more colorful language,
Yes, he did, yeah.
which is into the here. But we also talked to Steve Kulik, who's the vice chair of the Ways and Means.
Yep.
He said the same thing. So I would say that these numbers were preliminary from they're preliminary numbers from the governor. I don't think they're gonna stay.
Well, we've had in years past, as we've worked through budgets, whether it's a challenge on the revenue side at the state level or the choices the state, whether it's the executive or the legislative branch chooses in methods to distribute, there hasn't been some measure of compromise that goes through them. So we get the first pass, but we were here, Tom, you and I were here for, oh my God, the second Romney budget, which was kind of earth-shattering because there were not numbers being changed, but there were, whoever the governor was. doesn't really
Categories
matter.
eliminated.
Yeah, there were whole categories. There was categoric shifting that went on in that budget that frankly, in some ways, they're still in place today. But in these budget cycles, the MMA conference almost acts as the rollout of the first pass.
Yes, it's sort of like the test batch that comes
Right.
out to say, let's see how they really feel about this, you know?
Right. Whether it's this governor or prior governors, they kind of roll them out through this way, or they send out people in their administration to talk about some measure of the specifics to comfort, if you will, the municipal association. And it sounds like in this case here, there's a fair amount of play still in the visions between the executive branch and the legislative branch.
Yes, that would be a fair statement.
Yeah. And so the challenge that happens with us at the local level as we go about our budgets, of course, is, and we've had this happen, where it can go right, not necessarily, it's usually held to an election year, but in this case here, not likely. It can go really late in the game as we go about developing our budgets. That's where the
Makes it very
real,
difficult for us.
right, we have to kind of adjust to the gyrations between the governor or the old House one, House Ways and Means, the House consensus budget, and then the Senate, and then the compromise or the consensus budget as they work through the numbers.
Right.
So I would suggest that, go ahead, Tom.
It's very interesting, and the only thing I can say is, and it was questioned actually by a selectman from across the river, got up at one of our meetings and addressed this question
Nice.
to Michael Widmer, who is the president of the Massachusetts Taxpayer Associations. And actually, Massachusetts Taxpayer Association is a very conservative group when it comes fiduciary, they have no fiduciary responsibility, except they try to tell the residents of Massachusetts how their money is being spent.
Right.
And
Where
if
it
it's
comes
good,
from.
and if it's good or bad.
Right, right.
But, asked a question of Michael Widmer, that the governor's budget is up 5%. Now, when you would say that, you'd say, if his budget's up 5%, that's good for the towns, and cities and towns. It's interesting to note, because he followed up by saying 3.5% of that budget is already earmarked to increases that are already going to happen in the budget no matter what we do.
Huh,
So the budget was already gonna be up by 3.5%.
right, right,
So in effect, there's only 1.5% of growth,
right.
but they say the budget's grown by 5%,
Isn't that
but it's only
interesting?
1.5% that is actually being,
Bit of a misnomer. It's sort of like
Right.
gross versus net.
Right.
You know?
And this board's talked about legacy costs in the past, whether it's directional or programs you paid for or allocated for that now are up and running or whatever it is.
Yep.
You know, you have to pay for
They're
certain
there.
things. You know, and Tom, we've had those discussions at town meeting floors. Well, not just us. Everybody at town meeting has had those discussions at town meeting floor about what constitutes a new initiative, right?
Right.
So if you're gonna pay for a new initiative, then call it out as being a truly new initiative, not something that you funded a year prior and now is landing, or 2 years prior and is now landing on the operating, and you begin tempering the public as to it being an increase. Well, truly, it may not be an increase, but it's part of the, what are the, Dana used to say, the machinations. It's part of the machinations of the budget process.
I had the opportunity to go to Pittsfield yesterday to listen to go to the Italian-American Club on the south end of the Pentusket Lake.
Nice.
It was gorgeous, and listen to the 5 gubernatorial candidates once again, and the 4 lieutenant governor candidates. And they got to make a presentation to the Berkshire Brigades. And it was very interesting, because you hear that the typical, at that point, it's more a stump speech, and so people can get to know
Oh,
them.
yeah, right.
But they did have questions. They had, at the end, they had questions. And I thought that it was very interesting, because one of the questions that came from the audience is how, if you're elected governor, how do you eliminate and/or keep unfunded mandates in check?
Good question.
Well, to me, I had the answer.
Yeah.
It's simple, because how do the unfunded mandates get to us?
Right.
Either through executive order.
Right, right.
It comes from the executive,
Right.
it comes from the executive branch through an
Only 2
executive
places
order,
it comes from.
and/or it's from the legislators that trying to put in a policy that they don't have funding for.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward
Right.
where it comes from. And every single gubernatorial candidate, they all said that, they all commented how bad unfunded mandates were, but none of them would say that
About
they
how
would.
they'd solve it.
Yeah, and I thought that it was pretty funny for me, because I, I was looking at it and go, boy, that's a softball. I said,
Yeah. Wouldn't it be interesting to see a cue card come up and have one of the candidates go, well, this happened this year, this happened this year, this happened this year, this happened this year, and I won't let those happen.
well, you know,
And there's sometimes they react, it's reactive, other times it's just mandate.
it's very interesting, because Secretary of State and others, they're always trying to make it easier for people to vote, and they're projecting things to come into, like you can register like up to the day of the election or one day before. There's all change, they're talking about allowing people to vote, 10 days before the election, we just can walk in and vote. Well, what they don't talk about is, like, for us, for instance, our town office building is not open on Friday.
Right.
So would we have to hire staff to be open on Friday or Saturday and or Sunday? It doesn't say you can't vote on Sunday.
Right.
So you have to have staff here so they can vote.
Right.
And if you have to have staff, at the election, normal election, you have to have Democratic, you have, your poll workers, you have a Democrat, you have to have a Republican, you have to have the wardens, and you have to have, do you have to do the same type of staffing? So there's, and then who pays for that?
Right.
I kinda know who's gonna pay for it, but.
Yeah,
Right.
But,
Invariably, it
but
comes out of
those
some
are,
budget.
that's a good example of.
right, and that's the one that the town clerk had mentioned the other day, and she came up, and she said, well, that's an example of an unfunded mandate that maybe have the greatest intention of the world,
Right,
but who pays for it?
right. Somebody has to pay, whether it's staffing, hours, or utilities, or et cetera. Yeah, I agree.
Right, and
You
it
think
might be
about that.
fine, but you need to be able to discuss and understand the impact that it's gonna have
Yeah.
on people.
That's interesting. And like I said, so I wish people did have the opportunity, I wish somehow it was a little bit different, so people could actually listen, and I understand they have to ballot size, all that kind of stuff, but sometimes if you listen to some of these, I call them non-mainstream, but you're running for governor, so it can't be that far off the mainstream,
Sure.
but to listen what other people besides, like the number one and number two candidate, to listen what they have, I think those people add a lot of value to an election. And it may show people that there is other options out there, so.
Now, there's another one of those debates. Is it this Wednesday in Northampton?
Yep, Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Wednesday night
6 o'clock.
in Northampton at 6 o'clock. And I'm not endorsing nor whatever. I'm just recognizing that that happens to be in the
Opportunity.
Pioneer Valley.
Yeah.
We can actually go and see 5 candidates who are from the Democratic Party who are searching out the governor's office. And it may well be worth, if tickets are available or seating is available, seeking out that opportunity to go and listen. Because Tom, as you said, the MMA, that's a group of elected officials in an area. That's easy for people to go out and do a presentation on a gubernatorial race. In the case of the high school in Northampton, or in your case yesterday in Pittsfield on a Sunday, those are the kinds of things that people who are interested will seek out, and others may not recognize as a real opportunity.
And the thing is, Speaker DeLeo talked about, and one of the things he talks about is regionalization.
Yep.
So after our thing, I had an opportunity to talk to him about some of the regionalization projects that we work on in our
Good
3
job.
communities.
Nice.
And, well, we are looking for a couple grants, so
Right,
maybe.
right.
Yeah.
So-
You've got something you want to
Keep
Maybe
the
you see
light
the
on
town,
it,
maybe you
right?
see the town of Sunderland name come across, maybe we'll think twice. But, we talked about it, and I told him, and the only thing, you never tell somebody like that anything, but what I did mention is sometimes regionalization does not mean necessarily, specifically, that it's gonna be less expensive.
Right. Good
What's gonna
point.
provide the services in a professional, deliverable manner.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's as important, if not more important, than necessarily the cost, specifically the cost.
Right.
So we did talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it is, but invariably the services.
Right, because it always tends to get couched and mentioned in the framework of saving money.
Right.
And that's, what you always want to focus on saving money, but right, sometimes it's about quality of service too.
Well, David, you say saving money, and I think I truly believe, I truly believe there's the value question. Can you do
Yeah.
something with the same money that's of greater or better value?
Right.
Can you do something with if there's a minimal increase, how do you maximize the actual service that's being provided? And we've gotten over the last decade plus about, value means cheap. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. And to the extent, Tom, with regionalization may be more expensive retail, but may well be better quality as you're delivering a service. And if we get locked in that retail mindset, well, you know, in some ways, those are the kinds of quality that we end up hearing about as selectmen or department heads who are providing that service. Whether it's a time, a delay, you know, a lag time, whatever. There's a difference between that value and what constitutes cheap. And I think, you know, America, we've driven ourselves to be way too cheap
Well,
in
it's a
the
difference.
literal sense.
Right, it's the difference between being frugal, which means not wasteful, and
Frugal,
cheap.
I agree. Frugal and cheap. You're absolutely right,
You
Dave.
know, sort of getting back to what you kind of couch as old New England values.
I'm gonna step back now because I was almost
Yeah.
on the edge of a tirade, but
Again?
I won't do it. It hasn't been a long time.
But one of the, a lot of this kind of fits into one of the sessions that I was at, which was about citizen-centric reporting, because we're getting tons of data now that's available, and how to use that and, you know, provide information to people in a useful manner. One of the things that they're talking about is doing like a citizen-centric report. There's a nice little one here from the state of Texas. And no more than 4 pages, and it has all sorts of key information in there that,
Nice.
you know, like your budget information and things like that. Because we have our worksheets and things like that, but nobody really, as we've kind of realized too, you know, so you don't want to pour through every line item sometimes when you're trying to present information. And it was a very, very interesting discussion.
Interesting.
And some of these reports are actually quite good. And there's a lot, I've got a whole list of resources to look at in terms of helping out with this.
Nice. I was reading in the paper this couple days ago about how the budget format developed by a neighboring community acted as not just a spreadsheet, but a little bit of narrative, and how it acted as a directional guide for the spending priorities of the community that
Okay.
year. I thought that was kind of interesting.
yeah.
And it was actually, I believe, yesterday's paper, and it was the town of Hadley.
Okay.
So it was very interesting to hear that kind of, we see a budget spreadsheet, we see multiple budget spreadsheets,
Right.
but tying the spreadsheet to the policy seemed to be this initiative. You know, it's something that's worth, actually, it was Francis on the Finance Committee who said, you know, this is our document for this year about the priorities of the community. So, it may be something about format that helps in future years, and maybe late this year, but something for us to talk about in future years.
Yeah.
You know, is the budget truly a policy format? And in many ways, it is.
It is, right, it's one way to represent your policies.
Correct.
Oh,
Very,
that's
very
interesting.
interesting. So it was, again, that was in the paper, I believe, yesterday, and it was about the town of Hadley, about that format. Well, great, I'm glad the conference was both productive. We can continue to bring those things back to the community. Next up, there's no TA here. She's in downtown Chicago, maybe?
North Pole.
North Pole.
6 of one, half dozen the other
Pretty
right
close
now.
these days, right? So in front of us next, we have a caucus announcement, and we've been notified that this requires a signature. So, Mr. Clerk, you want to read the caucus announcement?
From the town clerk, caucus in compliance, caucus 2014, caucus in compliance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 53, Section 117 and 118. To the inhabitants of the town of Sunderland, a citizens caucus will be held March 3rd, 2014 at 6:30 p.m. at the Sunderland Town offices. Wendy Hool, town clerk, will call the caucus to order until a chairman is chosen. The purpose of the caucus is to nominate from the following town elected officers. We have positions that are going to be open, 3-year position, 1 position as an assessor, a 3-year position, 1 person for the Board of Health. We have a 3-year position, 3 people are needed for library trustees. We also have a 2-year position for library trustee that it's open. We have a position as the moderator, it's a 1-year position, 1 person. Planning board is a 5-year, 1 person. Riverside Cemetery trustee is a 3-year position, we need 1 person for that office. Sunderland Elementary School Committee, we need 2 people for 3 years. Elementary School Committee representative to the town park, it's a 1-year position, looking for 1 member. Selectboard of the 3 years, looking for 1 person. Frontier Regional School Committee, a 3-year position. We're looking for 1 person for that.
And this is sent to us from the town clerk. This is notice of the caucus again, March 3rd, 2014, 6:30 PM to be held here. This is one of those things that we have historically taken a motion and a vote on, but if we don't sign it, by Jeebs, it's a great way to get in trouble,
The
so.
wrath will be
The
upon us.
wrath will be upon
That's
us.
right.
Is there a motion to sign?
Motion, fast.
Motion and second. All those in favor?
Sign it.
3-0, please. Okay, we have a DLTA grant request in front of us downstairs, and that's important to review. This is an annual review for a grant requesting, setting some of the priorities for the town. This is administered by the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, and we've had this in front of us for a handful of years. Town administrators left the drafts, and they include some of the priorities. I'd suggest that the board take a look over the next couple of days, and it's got a due date here. It's a weighted prioritization, and if we can get those in here for Wednesday, Thursday, that'd be great. It's not a requirement of the board, we've never taken consensus votes on that, but the reality is, it's a grant application. We also have in front of us here, a resignation, from our assessor's clerk. Tom, you wanna read that?
This is addressed to Margaret Nardowitz, Sunderland Town Administrator, dated January 22nd, 2014. Dear Margaret, I must inform you that I am resigning from my position as Assistant Assessor. This choice has nothing to do with the work, the Board of Assessors, or the wonderful people in the town of Sunderland or the Sunderland town offices, but is necessary adjustment in my life. Since I was ill last year, I found that I must change some things. In the interest of having as smooth a transition as possible, and if you feel it is appropriate, I'd very much like to work in tandem with my replacement for 2 or 3 weeks and would gladly be available by phone after transition. I have also been building an office manual and will give it to you and the assessors in case you wish to make changes or use it in preparing a new job description. I'd like to leave by the end of March at the latest. Being the assistant assessor in Sunderland has been a great job, interesting and fulfilling, and frustrating only in my recent inability to commit as much time and energy as I would like. The job and the town need someone who can bring better consistency than I have in recent months. With deep appreciation, thanks for the support you have all given me and the friendships found here in Sunderland, and with warmest regards, Lee Whitcomb.
Well, Lee has been nothing but a breath of fresh air, and all we can do is wish her and her family continued health
Yep.
as they go forward. Is there a motion to accept this with deep regrets?
Motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Now, there is a date reference here, end of March. Is the prerogative of the board to put a date specific on that, or leave it open?
I would just leave it until, date, as supplied by Margaret Scott.
Very good. Okay, with that said, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
3-0, please, and we will make sure to get a correspondence to Lee.
Lee is just an outstanding person.
I think that letter kind of sums up her work attitude right there, you know?
It's
She was-
really-
she was a
We
fantastic
pulled the wool over
asset.
her, the only thing I can say, we pulled the wool over her eyes.
She had no idea what she was getting into. Yeah, but she's been an absolute treat.
But that is a, an assessor's position, so the assessors will have to,
Go about the postings.
yeah, they'll work with Margaret to do the posting and the interviewing and such.
Correct. And one of the things, Tom, upon receipt of this in the office, Tom and David, in receipt of the office, was to do an initial reach out through Lee to see if there was anybody in the area that, you know, was an initial interest, as well as some of the communications with other communities about a shared position. So I think actually you raised that point as well.
Yep.
Let's reach out. These are some of those kind of collaborative.
What is
Doesn't have to be regionalization, it can be collaborative. Okay, next up, we have a request for some deficit spending with respect to snow and ice deficits in front of us. Highway superintendent, we know this is winter, and in years past, we have allowed for deficit spending, an extension to a cap and sometimes those caps come back, and we have another storm or an extension, and we ask
Yep.
for a little more. This is a way for the board and the finance committee to recognize the need that the community has for snow and ice materials and labor to clear as the winter progresses. And in the last, I would say, half a dozen years anyway, if not more, these kinds of incremental requests have come forward, and we've acted on them accordingly. And so George Emery is highway superintendent, is asking here for authorization to spend $5,000 in excess of the available snow and ice wage appropriation. He feels pretty good about the materials, and we heard that last week at his budget presentation. So if that's the case, is there a recommendation or a motion to allow under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 31D, in excess spending of $5,000 for snow and ice wages?
Motion.
You have a motion?
A second.
Discussion?
Discussion, yeah. I just like to say, I think, it's a very difficult thing, as a highway superintendent, dealing with snow and ice. I don't think, matter of fact, I know, absolutely know you cannot please everyone
No.
with your snow removal. The town of Sunderland is not the state of Massachusetts. We don't have unlimited funds, to just put down pure salt on roads.
Right.
Even when there is no snow, and put out chloride trucks before storms and such. That being said, I think George and the highway department are very aware, of what's necessary for the safety of people in the town. People also have a responsibility to drive with
Good point.
at appropriate, speeds and with caution as necessary on the condition, as that meets the conditions of the roads also.
Right, right.
So I think George has been done a very good job the last, 4 years now, 5 years. And he does watch, the numbers very, very closely, and I'm pretty, when I see something like this, it's due, it's needed.
The reasonable.
Yeah, and then, Tom, you say needed, I appreciate not just the sentiment, but also the perspective. This is not asking for a significant amount of money. It's all, $5,000 is a significant amount of money, but in the form of wages, in particular on snowstorms, that can get chewed up in the course of, a 10 or 12 day period, pretty quickly.
Well, I would hope, because we will talk about it at town meeting. It'll come up
Absolutely.
at town meeting,
Absolutely.
but I would hope people would realize he's asking for 5,000.
Yep.
Not an unlimited amount,
I agree.
and by writing it in this manner, tells me he's very aware that money is a concern.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So,
Not asking for a tremendous amount, but asking for an incremental amount
correct.
to bridge the gap. Well put.
Also, it's for a pretty tangible thing.
Yeah.
It's clearing the roads.
Right, absolutely right. Okay, any further discussion?
I'm all set.
We have a motion that's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's $5,000. It's also important to bear in mind in this process, this also has to be approved by the finance committee. This is not a board exclusive vote. Okay, so we have DLT funding, request downstairs in front of us. That's again, a grant where some prioritization goes on. And then, we will be back at it, this upcoming Monday for a budget hearing. And I think this particular year, the budget, versus business meetings, so far, we're almost in the thick of it.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. I've been working out okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Certainly.
as for selectmen's updates, I'd just like to, you may have been reading things in the newspaper lately of the senior center
Yep.
and of the facility.
Oh, good point.
I can tell you that I have met with, Mark Gilmore, who is the Board of Oversight's representative from the town of Deerfield. I think, some of the writing, may not be exactly as what's going on. The senior center is open. They do not use there is a concern in the basement. They don't use the basement at this time. That concern is being addressed. So if you have been thinking about going to the senior center or not going to the senior center because of what you read in the newspaper, I would tell you not to hesitate. It is open. And we had put extra money in the budget for certain things. It doesn't look like it's, they've been able to find what they call RSVP volunteers to do certain things. So there's a proposal to open the senior center for some programming on Tuesdays. So it'll be for 3 hours. So that may happen, but we'll get more news for that in a very near future.
Super, super. I'm going to close the meeting very briefly with recognition of the passing of Dan McKenna. He worked on a couple of committees in the town. Kids went through the school system, passed at a young age, and we wish his family the best. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
A motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Call us out at 7:45. Thanks, FCAT. Great job as always.